Sprouter. I had only experienced Reiki a few times before the training itself. At the time, I was 5 years sober in AA and very active in the program, was going to therapy twice a week, had a lot of friends. I had a good job at the time running Radio Shack stores in malls, which at the time, malls and Radio Shacks were a really big thing, which is kind of hard to think about today since they both kind of disappeared. So there was a young woman who was 19 that worked for me part-time. Her name was Amy with 2 E's. And Amy and I didn't get along. We didn't like each other. In fact, we actually actively disliked each other. We couldn't find it bearable to be in the same room, but we tried to make the best of it and didn't succeed very well. So on this particular day, I was in the back room counting money and getting things ready to open the store. And Amy came in and sat down next to me. She was in tears. Her makeup was all a mess. Her bleach blonde hair was a mess. Her clothes were a mess. And she's hysterically crying and she said, "Michael, I just got back from the oncologist. I have cancer and they're going to have to do chemo and radiation and I'm a mess. And I think I don't know that I'm going to live and I'm really scared and I don't know what to do." And last night I was watching cable and changing channels and it was 2 in the morning, couldn't fall asleep. 3 in the morning, I couldn't fall asleep. 4 in the morning, couldn't fall asleep. And I'm changing the channels on the clicker, the remote. I'm changing the channels. I am just waiting for something to show up to give me hope. And she broke down crying and I said, I'm so sorry. I said, "Listen, I just recently was trained in something called Reiki. I don't know a lot about it. I don't have a lot of experience. I mean, I've been practicing on myself, but not anybody else since the training. Maybe it could help. I don't know." And then she sat up straight and she looked at me and her eyes got clear. She says, "Oh my gosh, Michael, while I was changing channels last night, I found this show about something called energy healing. And it was just, I remember watching the show and there was this guy in India and then there was a guy in Japan and a woman in Peru and they were talking about this thing. And I remember thinking to myself," she goes, "I don't believe in God. I don't believe in anything. And I prayed to God in that moment that somebody would show up and do this thing, this energy healing thing, this healing thing. It never would occur to me that was you, Michael, that you would be the one." And I said, "Listen, I don't really know how to do it. I don't know a lot about it." And she says, "Can you please just try?" She broke down in tears again, in a different kind of tears. It wasn't tears of exasperation. It was tears of softness. And I said, "Sure, I'll try." And I asked her to move her chair and she moved her chair. I stood behind her and I signed the symbols of Reiki as I remembered them and asked for the Reiki lineage to be present and for Reiki to flow through my hands and my eyes and out through my chest. And I put my hands behind her head and then slowly put them on her head. And oh my gosh, the warmth and the heat and like they were vibrating. My hands were vibrating. It was incredible. And while I'm doing all of this, this girl, teenage girl who was totally freaking out, only a minute before got really quiet and still and her body was barely moving. I could barely tell that she was breathing with my hands on her. And I could feel the energy right now while I'm sharing about it. And I continued to have my hands on her head. And then at some point, without me really thinking about anything or making a decision, because I didn't make a decision, I put one hand on top of her head and the other hand on the back of her head. And I'm just got my hands there. and they were just sitting there, and Reiki was coming through it. She was getting quieter and stiller and quieter and stiller. And then my hands moved, and they were on the back of her neck, and then they were on her shoulders. And Amy got still, and her body there was strength in it, and she felt alive. I felt alive. Reiki felt alive. And another minute or two must have gone by. And then at some point, I raised my hands off her shoulders, stepped back, and was still letting Reiki flow through my hands, covering her whole being and her energy field, which I didn't even know what an energy field was then. Nobody did. It was 1995. And I stepped away from her and sat at my desk real quietly, and I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what I was supposed to do. So I really softly said, Ashley, you can open your eyes. Because I didn't know her eyes were closed, so I was sitting in front of her. Her eyes opened really slowly, and they were full of life. Her whole face was full of life and vitality, and it was so beautiful. And this bratty, obnoxious teenager had none of that bratty, obnoxious teenager business in her. She was alive. And without asking me, and again, we couldn't stand each other just 4 minutes before this, she just leaned down, covered me in a hug, and was crying on my shoulder, her head nestled in my neck, just saying, thank you, Michael. Thank you. Thank you. And I didn't know what to say, so I just sat there. And I was kind of freaked out by it all. So I sort of hugged her back, but not really. I didn't really hug her. I just kind of put my hands on her elbows. But she was hugging me, and she was there and close and intimate and very full of love and all of that. So I think it was 9 days later, I'm in the back room. She shows up, the store was open, staff was up front doing their job. I was in the back room doing whatever the heck I was doing. And she comes in, and I was kind of confused because she was dressed in jeans and a ripped sweatshirt, and she doesn't wear jeans, and she doesn't wear a ripped sweatshirt, and she wasn't supposed to work that day. And I started looking in her direction, and she kneeled in front of me, and she said, Michael, and again, really gentle, soft tears. She said, Michael, I just got back from the oncologist. They ran 2 sets of tests this week, and I don't have cancer. They can't find it anywhere. And I don't have to do radiation. I don't have to do chemo. I don't have to do anything. She says, actually, I feel the best I've ever felt in my whole life. She goes, I know I haven't lived that long and haven't had a life like you, but this is the best I've ever felt. And this time she asked me if she could hug me. And I stood up, and she hugged me, and I sort of hugged her back. And she just kept whispering in my ears, thanks for saving my life, Michael. Thank you for saving my life. I'm going to make something of it now. I promise. I'm going to make something of my life. And we broke our hug, and that was sort of it. About 2 weeks after that, she quit Radio Shack, gave her notice, and she went to beauty cosmetology school, and she became a hairstylist. So now let's fast forward another couple of weeks. One night I'm driving home from work, and I kind of lived in the mountains of western New Jersey at this point, and I'm riding down Cat Swamp Road. Yep, that's a real name of a road. Windy little country road. And I see a bunch of cop cars, or at least cop lights, lights. I didn't know that they were cops or fire, ambulance. In the middle of the road is this really skinny road that you could barely fit a car coming each way. And it's a car crash. And the car in front of me, the cops let him go through, and then I pulled up, and they asked me to hold on and slow down. I lowered my window, and they said it was car crash, and the guy had hit a deer that just came out, and the deer's on the side of the road. And the guy because the ambulance hadn't gotten there yet. The guy's just leaning on his steering wheel, and the cops, you could go forward now. And he stands in front of me and gives me the wave to go. And again, I didn't make any decision to do this. I was new to Reiki. I didn't know anything. I took my hands off the steering wheel. I turned to my right to look at him. And without me even deciding it, my hands lifted like this. And Reiki flowed through, and it was incredible. And the guy whose head was just lying on the steering wheel, about 20 seconds in, he lifted his head, he looked at me, he nodded, and he whispered, "Thank you." Then he put his head back, put it back on the steering wheel, and then he sat up. And I was really freaked out because, again, this was now the second time something like this had happened. And the cops saying, "Come on, come on, come on," whistling and yelling. So I pull forward about 15 feet, and now I'm next to the deer, and the other state patrol, the other trooper is sitting there with the rifle, getting ready to put the deer down because he's bucking and lying, and he was going to die. And my hands do the same thing again to the deer, and the deer lifted its head a little bit, looked in my direction, made eye contact, closed his eyes, or her eyes, whatever, and softened, and then the cop shot him. I pulled away. Again, this first 90 days of me with Reiki was insane. So I used to play volleyball several times a week, which I do again now, which is awesome. And the place I usually play at on Wednesday nights was canceled because something was going on in the school gymnasium that we used. So I got online, a local paper. There was a pickup game in town, and I walk in, and it's in this awful elementary school gym. The ceilings are only like so high, and there's a stage, and there's all the tables on the outside. Anyway, it was volleyball, and I was playing, and it sucked, and wasn't having very much fun, but whatever, I figured I'd just keep playing because it was better than going home. And we're all playing, and the daughter of one of the women that was playing, she was up on the stage playing and being by herself. She looked about 8-10 years old. I'm going to guess 8 or 9. I don't know. And we're all playing, and then in the middle of nothing, we hear this big thump. And we all turn around, and the girl fell off the stage, and she breaks out hysterically crying. And everybody runs that way. And the mother and the aunt and everybody else is circled around her. The mother yells, "Somebody go find a payphone and call an ambulance." And everybody's gathered around. "I'll go get some water," and all of that. I didn't know anybody, and I didn't know anybody, so I stayed in the back. There's about 15, 20 people. I stayed in the back. And again, without any notice, without anything, my hands just lifted up. I didn't even notice them lifting up. And then just like out of nowhere, Reiki's flowing through. And the girl stops crying. She gets on her knees, and she turns around, and she looks at me, and she said, "Thank you." And she kissed her mama, hugged her mama. She kissed her aunt, and then she got up and she ran onto the stage. Of course, everybody's now looking at me, and I'm like, what the fuck do I do here, And so anyway, those 3 experiences were the beginning of my training and practice of Reiki. I was pushed to the front of the line to get with Reiki and to learn how to do it. And here's a crazy fact. Since the day I was trained in Reiki, I have practiced Reiki in some shape or form every day since January 26th of 1995 till today. It's incredible to me that any human being could do that. It totally blows my mind that I'm that human being.